Hello and welcome back to Through the Trapdoor. I'm Katie.
And I'm Emily.
And this is our podcast where we read you Harry Potter fan fiction.
I've talked about it a couple times now. I want to read Lockhart fan fiction in between this chapter story and the next.
Yes.
And people are actually sending us
I
Lockhart fan fiction.
It's so exciting.
I was very excited when you told me people started sending it to you.
Yes.
So if you have fan fiction you want us to read,
send it
to us. We'll be excited and probably read it.
Fact.
Yeah.
It's just a true fact.
Or if you just have other fan fiction you feel like we should read, because we read a lot of fan fiction.
That's also very true.
As evidenced by me not being able to remember this story because I'm busy reading a different story.
Yeah. I have no idea what happened last time. I do not remember. That's okay.
We'll just go with it. Usually we remember after about a page or so what happened.
Right, it comes back to us.
Yeah.
But I'm still trying to remember in my brain. All right, well, it's my turn. I'm reading chapter 10. Pranks and Punishment is our title today. Just what are you Oh, that's right.
I remember now. Last episode, they were in Hogsmeade, and Harry got cornered in a booth by Fudge.
Yep.
That's where we're at.
That's where we're at.
Also, it took until the first sentence for me to remember that we're reading a story about Snape's cousin, Severus. Salazar. Snape. Still stuck in my other one, sorry.
LaSalle.
I was literally reading it before you got here. Probably shouldn't have done that.
Just what are you doing in Hogsmeade, Mr. Potter? Snape's icy tone cut down Harry's spine. These were the first words that were spoken since leaving the Three Broomsticks, and they had already made their way halfway back to school. You seem to have a habit of disobeying rules and showing up in Hogsmeade a lot more than you ought to. I'm sorry, Harry mumbled. You sure will be, Snape growled. I don't think you realize exactly how much trouble you're in. Lay off him, Sev, LaSalle said loudly. Like you never broke the rules when you were his age. Oh.
And then he called out.
And he snorted a laugh. Why, I can remember when you and Rosier took those dung bombs. But Harry didn't hear the rest of the story, for Snape rudely interrupted. I don't want you speaking, Salazar. You're not well. Is he just drunk, or is he actually not well?
He was drunk.
So, come on, Snape.
Mm-hmm. You know he's gonna blabble. That's what I do.
That's what any of us do. LaSalle rolled his eyes. I know. And then leaned on Snape's shoulder. But it's Friday. Oh, then why do you really care that much if Harry went to Hogsmeade? I mean, I know he's not supposed to, but, it's Friday.
Yeah.
But it's Friday. This did not appear to be a good idea. Harry held his breath as Snape stopped and curled his lip at his cousin. Tactfully, LaSalle backed off, but then, looking into Snape's face, stated plainly, I like Fridays.
Oh, LaSalle.
I mean, most people do like Fridays.
Yeah, it's true.
LaSalle then turned towards Harry as Snape accomplished an even higher look of disgust, to which LaSalle mockingly copied. Ooh. So that Harry could see. You know, he wasn't always this bad, he said in a hushed tone. Sure, he was bad, but he's gotten much worse. I don't blame him, really, but we've both been through rough weather, and I've figured out how not to make everyone around me miserable. But he just refuses to try. He's just built up these great stone walls around himself, and he won't let anyone in. He shook his head and sighed. You ought to get him to drink some of whatever you had, Harry dared to suggest in a whisper. No, LaSalle said slightly louder. It doesn't work that way. I find that if someone is depressed when they begin to drink, they only become more so. So I dare say it would be a horrible idea. Besides, he refuses to touch the stuff. He then leaned over and confessed quietly, "But I did manage in getting him drunk once. He went down into the basement and played with his potions, came up with a formula he had been trying to duplicate for months, but by the morning he had forgotten how he'd done it. Sulked about for weeks afterwards, and ever since, he doesn't touch a drop."
I probably would be pretty upset too.
Right? But at the same time, like, even if you're drunk, write it down.
Yeah.
At this, Snape, with a horrible look on his face, turned and pointed his wand at his cousin. "Petrificus totalis," he muttered under his breath. Sorry, I shouted that.
Was not muttering under your breath at all.
That's fine. This completely ruined any chance of any further conversation as LaSalle was rendered completely immobile, including his jaw. "And this is a very good reason why you shouldn't drink too much," Severus said bitterly to his cousin. "Any fool would have been able to deflect the spell I just cast at you, and in an inevitable lesson for you too, Mr. Potter." Harry wanted to shrink away. A good wizard never should allow himself to be put in such situation as to be made vulnerable, such as being under the influence of alcohol or sneaking off to Hogsmeade when one knows he shouldn't be there. Severus was using the same charm to move LaSalle and his staff that had been used on him 2 years before when Sirius had succeeded in knocking him out. This brought to mind how Snape had actually wanted Sirius to get the Dementor's kiss. Harry ceased to be scared now, but became angry.
Sounds right for Harry.
It seems about right. He is fueled by anger.
True.
He's not really scared of much. He's like always scared of getting in trouble, but then he just replaces it with anger.
Yeah. He's never truly scared of getting in trouble. Like, he's worried that he'll get in trouble, but it's not like, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble. It's like, I'll probably get in trouble. I'm going to do it anyhow.
Right.
I'd also like to point out that Harry's not nearly angsty enough in this story.
Oh, yeah, because book 5, it was pure.
He was just so much angst.
He was just full of, like, teenage sass and teenage anger. "Oh, will you stop trying to bully me? You'll just have to take me to Dumbledore, and he'll have the final say, not you. And you can stop threatening me with expulsion. Fred and George have done more than sneak off to Hogsmeade, and LaSalle said before, you so conveniently shut him up, you did some things against the rules yourself." Harry was almost taken aback by his own outbursts and quickly began to wonder how far he'd get up to the school lawn before Snape drew out his wand. Okay, well, if Snape draws his wand on you, that's like, that's a real no-no.
Yeah, but Harry also takes off running away.
Also, yeah.
So I feel like as a teacher, if like a student all of a sudden like just runs away from you, you can like pull out your wand and stun them.
Yeah, but also at the same time, if he's running, like, are they already on the school grounds, or is he just running towards the school grounds? Because if he takes off running in a different direction than the school grounds, then maybe. But you could also just send a Patronus to Dumbledore. Be like, hey, Harry's running away from me. I caught him in Hogsmeade. He's running towards the school. You might want to head him off.
True. But do you really think Snape would do that? He would just stun Harry.
Right,
Or other.
He had options.
True.
"So you think that makes everything okay?" said Snape in a silky tone. Unexpectedly, he grabbed Harry by his collar and stuck his nose right up to where it was almost touching his own. "Listen here, Potter. I've had to put up with a lot these past 5 years. Had to put up a lot with your father, too." But as far as this story is going, Snape, you seemed like kind of a dick.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you were kind of a dick in school, but this seems like you were much more of a dick than Hogwarts you in canon. So, you're just as cocky as he was. You've been pushing my buttons, just asking for trouble. And if you had only the faintest idea of what I'm capable of doing...
First of all, I don't feel like Harry ever, came to school and was like, oh, that seems like a fun teacher to push his buttons. It was, you started by being a dick to Harry.
Like, you straight up. He was literally taking diligent notes of all of the things you were saying in his very first potions class with you.
Yep.
And then you were like, ah!
Yeah, you yelled at him for not paying attention and then yelled at everyone else for not taking notes.
When he was legitimately paying attention to every word you were saying
And taking
by
notes.
writing down every word you were saying. So stop being such a dick, Snape.
Apparently this is Snape Hate Day. We're feeling very ranty about it.
Like, he's been a dick since day one.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that was even in canon at one point when Dumbledore was, talking to him. He's like, everybody else says he's so pleasant and a hard worker. You're the only one who's like, he's a cocky asshole who doesn't do any work.
Yeah. Because Snape is always, going out of his way to, pick on Harry and, banish his potions and, stand over him so Harry would mess up his potions.
Right. Harry couldn't believe he was interrupting Snape. In fact, I do. I know you used to be a Death Eater. All your friends were too. Most of them are dead now, killed by Aurors. He was staring right into those black, tunnel-like eyes. So you're always saying how much I'm like my father. Well, good thing, for I'd hate to be like you.
True.
Snape let go. For a moment, even looked lost for words. You haven't the faintest clue to my past, he said at last. I know more than you think. Snape glowered over at LaSalle. And not just from your cousin, Harry added. Dumbledore will hear of your insubordinate, disrespectful attitude, was all that Snape could come up with. Dumbledore did hear all that Snape said. LaSalle had been sent off to his apartment to recuperate, so there was no support that Harry could hope for. Snape had been talking for some time before Dumbledore put up his hand. I can't work this out for you, he said to both Snape and Harry. Now what I do have to attend to is you. Harry went to Hogsmeade, left the school grounds without permission. I really am sorry, Professor, Harry began sincerely, but after all that's happened this past week, I just felt so cooped up, I understand, and it is hard, Dumbledore said sympathetically, but the fact remains you broke some major rules. I would also think that after what has been happening to you, you'd be more cautious. This made Harry feel awful, and it showed in his tone of voice. It won't happen again. I really am sorry. I know you are. However, being sorry is only half of the consequences. The other unfortunate is 100 points from Gryffindor. You know? Fair.
That's not bad at all.
No?
Much better than detention.
Well, we don't know if there will be a detention. We haven't finished the block.
True.
Harry looked startled at this, but Dumbledore continued talking, not giving him a chance to dispute it. Well, no, he was not going to. The other thing is, I want you to try and work on this problem that you and Professor Snape seem to be having. What problem? You mean just the fact that Snape's a dick?
That's the only problem here. Harry's just defending himself.
Snape is literally just a terrible teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Harry had been thinking that the 100 points from his house was the worst part of this, but now he had a sinking suspicion that it wasn't. Severus, you told me that you were going to start a thorough cleaning and storing of the potion storeroom. Were you not? There was a hint of dread evident in Snape's voice as he answered that he was. Good, then I'm assigning Harry to help you. He'll serve detention with you until it's complete. Though, remember that he still needs to make it to Quidditch practice. Right, Harry? Harry nodded, glad that Dumbledore had made this point. Very well, and one more thing, Dumbledore added, making both Harry and Snape cringe. Harry, you are not to leave the school grounds without a professor being present. Yes, Headmaster. And Harry turned to leave, but remembering something. Sir? Yes? The Chudley Cannons are playing the Suffolk Steamers in a week at Hogsmeade Field. Oh, that should be fun. Dumbledore looked pleased. I suppose that you'll have to see that game. I would like to, and I know some other students who would too. Dumbledore nodded. Severus? Snape clenched his jaw and seemed to be trying to bore holes in the wall with his eyes. As I remember, you used to play Quidditch. He does not seem very pleased about this.
Nope.
He didn't seem too happy at having to admit this in front of Harry. I'll put you in charge of coordinating a group to see the game. You can have your cousin's help.
Snape is not going to be happy.
Not even a little bit. May I say something? Snape looked to be sweating under the collar. I don't think I'm the best choice. Of course you are. You used to love Quidditch. Go have fun.
Dumbledore, giving no fucks about what anybody else wants.
Yep, doesn't actually care at all. Then he said more seriously, and I want you to go because I have complete faith in your ability to keep the students safe, especially if Fudge should have occasion to try and spirit Harry away again. Wednesday morning, they all marched from Professor Trelawney's tower across the Hogwarts lawn, lightly crusted with frost, to care of magical creatures. Harry pulled his scarf up over his nose, and most of the students had the hoods on their capes up over their heads. They were expecting a new project and were slightly nervous about it since they had not taken the chance to find out what it was before. Harry looked over at the crowd of Slytherins approaching across the field. They were unusually pleasant looking, talking and babbling to each other in a rather friendly manner. What's he doing here? Ron snorted. Harry took a second to notice in that the thick of the pack was Professor LaSalle. He did not have his staff with him, and without it he seemed to blend in with the crowd of students around him, especially since Crabbe and Goyle were walking close at hand and were about the same height. Instead of his staff, LaSalle carried what looked to be a large saddle covered in dark coarse fur over his other arm. He slung the ornate silver bridle. Draco Malfoy was at his side carrying a second saddle and bridle. Some of the boys were staring at him rather jealously. The girls, on the other hand, seemed much more interested in LaSalle. Do you think I could have a chance to ride one of them, Professor? Asked Pansy Parkinson in a sweet tone that Harry thought completely impossible of her. Probably not today, Pansy. Perhaps later, Professor LaSalle replied. How about if I stayed after class? She persisted. No, Pansy, Draco informed her with an air of importance. I'm going to ride with the professor after class. He seems to be doing much better, Ron commented harshly. Ron, are you still angry at Professor LaSalle for lending that firebolt to Dennis Creevey? Said Hermione. Harry looked over and noticed LaSalle's right hand was still heavily wrapped in gauze. Hagrid had come around from behind his hut and stood by the Gryffindor students as LaSalle approached with the Slytherins. Well, I don't feel too sorry for him right now, Neville grumbled. Harry whirled around, somewhat surprised at the comment. Look at him, Neville exclaimed. He fits right in with that group.
Pretty sure he'd fit right in with any group.
Right. It's just who he is as a person. He does, doesn't he? Ron added thoughtfully. The group of Slytherins quieted as they approached and returned to glaring at the Gryffindor classmates. Hagrid stepped forward. Good morning, Professor Snape, he said rather plainly. LaSalle gave a fake smile and turned to the students and said, Vincent, will you please take this for me? He handed the fur-covered saddle to Crabbe, who seemed to take it with a certain reverence in his large hands. Ready to begin? Said LaSalle in a soft voice to Hagrid. Hagrid drew in a long sigh and smiled over at the Gryffindor students. Yes, Professor Snape is going to help me with the next unit. I don't bother too much with the beast he's going to teach you about, but he happens to be quite partial to him. I'll be teaching you how to handle and care for Magnus mares, Professor LaSalle broke in. Can anyone tell me exactly what a Magnus mare is?
No.
I can't. As usual, Hermione put her hand in the air while Ron and Harry wished that they had completed the assigned reading.
Sounds pretty normal.
Sounds like a fact. By now, they should have learned to do the suggested reading before they started a new unit in Hagrid's class. I would think.
Yeah. Yep. Also, did Hagrid ever actually assign any reading?
No, I don't think so, but I feel like LaSalle would have been like, Hagrid, maybe assign this reading for them.
Yes, true.
For this particular one. It seemed, however, that they weren't going to have to worry too much. Magnus mares didn't sound too dangerous. A big clue was the fact that Hagrid was not going to handle them. Well, Hermione would tell them what they needed to know. Yes, Agatha, LaSalle called out, pointing to a raised hand. The Gryffindors were all dumbfounded to hear a different name called upon than Hermione. Harry looked over to see that most of the Slytherin girls were lowering their hands disappointed. A Magnus mare, Millicent began importantly, is a horse with higher intelligence than a normal horse that possesses magical powers. Sounds a lot like a unicorn without a horn.
Yep. Or a thestral.
Or a Pegasus.
Mm-hmm.
They're companions for wizards, especially in earlier times when they could be taken out among muggles without question. Okay. Pansy Parkinson added. Harry swore she was actually blushing. And some have unicorn blood, Mandy Brocklehurst said. Very good, LaSalle commented, and the girls smiled.
Who was this Agatha person? Because literally none of the people who responded were named Agatha.
Not a single one.
It was Millicent, Pansy, and then whoever that last girl was.
Maggie?
Yeah.
I think what happened was he called on a Slytherin girl, so they all just started talking.
Probably.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. Are you seeing this? Ron said, gaping. It's disgusting, Hermione grumbled. They're falling all over him, Harry finally said. Hermione nodded. Poor LaSalle.
You mean like you did, Hermione, in year 2?
With Lockhart?
With
And
Lockhart?
every other girl did?
And every other girl.
Sounds a little hypocritical to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting that you should point out that some have unicorn blood, because some do. Magnus mares aren't all mares, which is a female horse. They can be male or female. However, most are mares. Well, that's why their name is what it is.
Yep.
And sometimes, but mind you, it's rare, a Magnus mare stallion pairs with a unicorn mare. Can anyone tell me what can happen if this occurs? Hermione didn't even bother to raise her hand as they listened, amazingly enough, to hear Draco Malfoy answer, a dark unicorn. Precisely. And LaSalle patted Malfoy approvingly on the shoulder. And if you ever discover about a dark unicorn, distinctively with a black coat and twisted horn, it should be reported immediately to the Ministry of Magic. They are highly dangerous and illegal. Only a wizard with a firm grasp of the dark arts can earn their respect. So that's why Malfoy was able to answer the question, Ron whispered to Hermione. His old man's probably got one. Harry had to agree. I want you all to remember that for Defense Against the Dark Arts exams as well. Professor LaSalle then proceeded to catch one of the mares that was being held in the pen and had Draco saddle it up as he spoke. I want you to pay close attention. The Magnus mares are much like hippogriffs in that you must earn their respect before you ride one, though they won't claw you to death if you happen to upset one. That must be comforting to Malfoy, some of the Gryffindor crowd whispered with giggles passed around. Always make sure that their back is free of dirt before you put on the saddle, and it's generally good to groom them before you ride so that you can strike up an understanding. They'll be giving you a ride on their back, so you should be giving them something in return. You'll notice with the bridle, there's no bit. LaSalle continued to explain about the tact and intricacies of riding. Now, I'll let Draco demonstrate to you all. He nodded, and Malfoy swung himself easily onto the saddle. He grinned down at LaSalle. The first true smile, not laced with a smirk, that Harry had ever seen cross his face in the 4.5 years at Hogwarts. When sitting, keep your heels down and your back straight, and it will be easiest for you to stay on the saddle. Now, it is a good idea to give her a pat and a kind word in her ear before starting out, or else she may just decide not to give you a ride and just throw you right off. Lysau turned to Malfoy. You can take her out and ride around for a bit, but nothing over a trot. Then turned back to the students. You start by asking them verbally or with a nudge of your legs, never a kick. Now, the most important thing about a Magnus Mare is their ability to conduct magic. While on one, your spells are given more power, even more so than a unicorn, though it is rare when a unicorn or a half unicorn will allow you on its back. They also stay with you if you use a portkey or apparate. Now, Draco, he exclaimed, don't crack your head open trying to show off. Please do, Ron mumbled. Malfoy had just jumped the mare over a stack of firewood. It wasn't long before class was over. Harry wanted to stay behind and visit with Hagrid, but he was assigned to help Snape with the potion storeroom for an hour before lunch. On his way back to the castle, Malfoy nearly ran him over as he continued to tear around the school lawn on the back of the Magnus Mare. That hour in the dungeon seemed to take forever to pass. Snape would turn around every now and then to snarl at Harry for carrying a certain grotesque jar without enough care. Then, when he would slow down and show he was being more careful, he was reprimanded for taking his time.
That sounds accurate.
Sounds about right. We haven't got all day, Potter. No. Don't you know your alphabet? Quag grease goes before rat's teeth. Snape was about to bark some new order when he looked up to see Dumbledore standing in the room. Harry hadn't seen him come in and was beginning to wonder if he could apparate within the walls of the school. Severus, I need you in the teacher's lounge. I have an important announcement to make to the staff. If you could find Argus, it would be helpful. I believe that he's down here somewhere at the moment. Dumbledore looked very depressed. And Harry, you can go up to the Great Hall. I'll be making an announcement during lunch. Harry was alarmed, but by the look of it, Snape was too. We haven't lost anyone, have we? Snape said quietly. No, it isn't about Voldemort. And with nothing more, he left. Harry was snacking on some grape tomatoes when Hermione and Ron arrived.
It's very specific.
Very specific. So how'd it go? Hermione dared to ask. Horrible, as expected, but I got out early. Something's up with the professors. Don't know what, though. Food appeared, and still the head table remained empty. Time passed, and their plates cleared, ready for dessert, when Dumbledore, followed by the staff, filed out. The students had a sense of dark atmosphere, and the hall fell silent. My dear students, Dumbledore began, as you know, we've been on guard against Voldemort for some time. They all seem to hold their breath, and I and your professors have been at odds with the Ministry in this matter. Up until now, it has not greatly affected us. This morning, I was informed by the Ministry of Magic that I was relieved of my post as headmaster. No! Many gasped together, and there was a clear disconnect reverberating throughout the room. However, Dumbledore continued, your wonderful professors refuse to continue teaching if I step down. As a result, I am being forced to remain. Understandably, the Ministry has become extremely upset and have severed all funds to Hogwarts. He paused for a moment as the staff all stood around him. He then continued, I thought I would inform you of the circumstances and make you all aware of the great sacrifices that your professors are making, as they will now be continuing work without pay. We will also not have the ability to continue with some of the extracurricular programs. Things will get tight, but we'll be working hard in order to see to it that you are all able to continuing Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After this, there was an applause. Then Fred and George stood up and said, let's hear it for our professors! And there was an even louder applause. Dumbledore smiled and sat down before the hall returned to the dull roar of voices. When did you guys slip in? Ron asked his brothers, who seemed to be beaming from ear to ear, clearly putting what Dumbledore had said behind them and moving on to more important sorts of things. "We came from the kitchen," Fred informed. Well, that's also fact. Paid a visit to Dobby. "Did you know he used to work for the Malfoys? Anyway, he hates Draco."
True.
George took a sip of his pumpkin juice. "Despises him," Fred added. "But, of course, you could expect that." Mm-hmm. "So he agreed to help us." George slammed his empty goblet to the table. "Help you with what?" Harry asked Riley. The twins just grinned. "You'll see." "Now's not the time," Harry said slowly. "After what Dumbledore just said?" It's perfect timing. Let all the professor know that some things will remain the same. Besides, as they say, laughter is the best medicine." They immediately swiveled around to look at the Slytherin table. Dessert had appeared at once, Harry recognizing the yellow pastries. "You didn't." Fred beamed. "Yep." Intently they watched as Draco picked up his pastry and bit into it. There was a startled cry that went up from the Slytherin table and some chirping that made the whole hall turn their attention to where Draco sat, or where, more precisely, an overgrown canary was perched. The bird popped quickly back into the boy, who was already hightailing it for the door, leaving a trail of yellow feathers and roaring laughter in the wake of his hasty retreat.
Oh, Fred and George.
I love Fred and George. They are my favorite. End of the chapter.
Thank you so much for joining us on our journey through the trap door.
Please leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes. It would literally mean the world to us.
It really would.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Through the Trapdoor 16 or on Twitter at The Trapdoor.
And please send us an email at throughthetrapdoor16@gmail.com with any story suggestions. And as always, join us again next Saturday as we travel through the trapdoor.